is a surprising fact here in Göbekli Tepe that we have monumental architecture so early in the history of mankind. So we didn't expect it to have it so early.
These pillars dates back 11,600 years. It appears to be purposely buried at the same time of the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe. This is fascinating.
In the hills of southeastern Turkey stands a monument that rewrites everything we thought we knew about human history.
Göbekli Tepe, brother, if there is such a thing as an ancient conspiracy theory, it's this.
Göbekli Tepe turned out to be what you think it might have been. Where are the metal tools? Where are the writing, the examples of writing?
This incredible feat of architecture is not the most revolutionary thing about this place.
It's called Göbekli Tepe, and it's over 11,000 years old.
What he discovered was mind-blowing. After discovering the first T-shaped pillar buried at the site, he soon found more of these massive structures.
For decades, archaeologists debated its purpose.
It wasn't until German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt visited the site and began digging. They realized what was really at this site.
Then artificial intelligence examined the carvings and discovered something that changes everything.
Because we'd never before known or imagined even that simple hunter-gatherers could produce such spectacular monumental structures.
The world's oldest temple. Göbekli Tepe sits on a barren hillside in what is now Turkey. The site dates back to somewhere between 9,600 and 8,200 BCE. That makes it roughly 11,500 years old. To put that in perspective, it was built 6,000 years before Stonehenge and thousands of years before the pyramids of Egypt. When archaeologists first discovered the site, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The structures were massive, carefully planned, and beautifully decorated. But here's the strange part. The people who built it weren't supposed to have the ability to create something like this. These were hunter-gatherers, people who moved from place to place, following herds of animals and foraging for plants. They had no cities, no farms, and no written language. Yet somehow, they built one of the most remarkable structures in human history. The discovery happened almost by accident. A local farmer was working his field when he kept hitting large stones just below the surface. When archaeologists investigated, they found carved pillars that had been deliberately buried thousands of years ago. The more they dug, the more remarkable the site became. The scale of Göbekli Tepe challenged every assumption archaeologists held about prehistoric societies. The site contains at least 20 circular enclosures, each one carefully designed and positioned. The pillars within these circles can reach heights of 18 feet and weigh many tons. The precision of the construction is remarkable. For years, most experts believed Göbekli Tepe was a temple, a place where ancient people gathered to worship gods or perform sacred rituals. The circular structures, the decorated pillars, and the absence of domestic activities all pointed toward a religious function. Scholars imagined ancient ceremonies taking place under the stars, with people coming from miles around to participate in rituals we can barely imagine. But when Grok AI analyzed the site, it found patterns that human researchers had missed. The artificial intelligence suggested something far more disturbing. What if all those assumptions were wrong? What if Göbekli Tepe wasn't built for worship at all? What if it was built as a warning? A message from survivors of catastrophe to their distant descendants. This possibility transforms everything we thought we knew about our ancestors and raises troubling questions about our own future. The challenge of building the impossible. To understand why Göbekli Tepe is so remarkable, you need to understand when it was built. This was the pre-pottery Neolithic period. Humans were just beginning to experiment with settled life. Most people still lived in small, mobile groups. There's no evidence of permanent settlements in the area at this time. No villages, no farms, no organized governments. The wheel hadn't been invented yet. Neither had metal tools. Draft animals like oxen or horses weren't available for labor. People had only stone tools, wooden implements, and their own muscle power. Yet the builders of Göbekli Tepe somehow quarried massive limestone pillars. Some of these stones weigh up to 20 tons. That's equivalent to about 3 full-sized elephants. They had to be cut from solid rock, transported across the landscape, and then positioned upright. Even with modern equipment, this would be a challenging task. The quarry sites have been identified nearby. Workers would have used stone hammers and picks to gradually chip away at the limestone bedrock. They created channels around the pillar until it could be freed from the surrounding rock. Then came the even harder task of moving it. Without wheels or animals to pull sleds, the builders must have used log rollers, ropes, and sheer human power. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of people would have been needed to move each stone. The coordination required is staggering. Someone had to organize the workers, provide them with food and water, and keep the project moving forward. The site contains multiple circular enclosures. Each one features 2 tall pillars in the center, surrounded by smaller pillars arranged in precise patterns. The circles are carefully designed, with specific orientations and measurements. The central pillars often have carved arms and hands, suggesting they might represent human figures or deities. Everything about the architecture suggests planning and purpose. These weren't random arrangements of stones. Someone designed these structures with specific intentions in mind. The enclosures follow similar patterns, but each has unique features. The consistency suggests a shared vision or tradition guiding the construction. Here's what makes this truly baffling. There's no sign that anyone ever lived at Göbekli Tepe. Archaeologists found no cooking fires, no food preparation areas, and no household tools. The oldest levels of the site contain only decorated pillars, animal bones from feasts, and evidence of large gatherings. The site was purely ceremonial. People came here for specific events, then left. They returned to their camps or temporary settlements elsewhere. But why would nomadic hunter-gatherers, people who struggled just to survive, invest so much energy in building a place they couldn't live in? To organize the construction would have required hundreds of people working together. The project must have continued for decades, possibly centuries. Different enclosures were built at different times, suggesting the site remained important across multiple generations. This level of cooperation shouldn't have been possible for people without agriculture or permanent settlements. Think about the logistics. Workers needed to be fed while they labored on the pillars. Someone had to hunt game and gather plants to provide meals for the construction crews. Tools had to be made and repaired constantly. The stone hammers and picks would have worn down quickly against limestone bedrock. Leadership structures must have existed to coordinate all this activity. Someone made decisions about where to place each enclosure, how to decorate each pillar, and when to hold the feasts that brought people together. This implies social hierarchy and authority in societies we thought were egalitarian. It seems less like a practical project and more like a mission driven by something powerful enough to command the effort of multiple generations. But what could motivate such an undertaking? The answer may lie in the carvings that cover every surface. The stones that speak. Walk among the pillars of Göbekli Tepe and you'll find yourself surrounded by images. Every pillar bears intricate carvings of animals, insects, and abstract symbols. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, far beyond what you'd expect from people who supposedly lived simple lives. Foxes prowl across the stone surfaces, their bodies lean and alert. Wild boars charge forward with fierce energy, their tusks prominent and threatening. Vultures spread their wings wide, dominating the upper sections of many pillars. Snakes coil and strike with deadly grace. Scorpions raise their stingers in defensive postures. Spiders extend their legs in perfect anatomical detail. Some of the carvings are realistic, capturing the exact appearance and proportions of the creatures. The artists understood animal anatomy and movement. They had clearly spent time observing these animals in nature, studying how they moved and behaved. Other carvings are more stylized, reduced to their essential forms, like symbolic representations rather than literal depictions. But all of them share one thing. They're deliberately placed. Each animal appears in a specific location, facing a specific direction. The arrangement isn't random or decorative. These images were positioned according to a plan that made sense to the builders. One pillar shows what appears to be a sheep or similar horned animal. Another depicts a spider with 8 carefully carved legs, each one precisely rendered. Yet another shows an insect with 6 legs in exact anatomical detail, showing the builders understood the difference between spiders and insects. The level of observation required to create these images suggests people who studied the natural world closely and systematically. Vultures appear frequently throughout the site, more than any other bird species. In some carvings, they seem to be carrying human-like forms in their talons or beaks. Many scholars interpret this as a representation of death, or the journey of the soul after death. Sky burial, where bodies are left for vultures to consume, may have been practiced by these ancient people. The constant presence of predators and dangerous creatures might reflect a worldview shaped by survival in a harsh environment. These were animals that could kill humans. Scorpions, snakes, and wild boars were genuine threats to people living without modern medicine or protective structures. Their prominence in the carvings might indicate respect, fear, or an attempt to gain power over them through ritual. But there's something else hidden in these carvings. Something that becomes clear when you look at them differently, not as individual images, but as a complete system. Many of the animals correspond to constellations, not the constellations as they appear in our sky today, but as they would have appeared nearly 12,000 years ago. The Earth's axis shifts slowly over thousands of years in a process called precession. This means the night sky looked different to the builders of Göbekli Tepe than it does to us. The precision of this alignment is remarkable. It suggests the builders were not just skilled stoneworkers, but also careful observers of the heavens. They tracked the movements of stars across seasons and years. They noticed which constellations rose and set at different times. They understood patterns in the sky that repeated annually. For hunter-gatherers without writing, without any optical instruments, without permanent buildings to serve as observatories, this level of astronomical knowledge seems impossible. Yet here it is, carved into stone pillars that have stood for over 11,000 years. The stones appear to serve 2 functions at once: markers of ritual space and records of cosmic events, records that artificial intelligence would later connect with frightening accuracy. The Vulture Stone reveals its secrets. Among all the pillars at Göbekli Tepe, one stands out. Archaeologists call it Pillar 43, though it's better known as the Vulture Stone. It's covered with symbols that have puzzled researchers since the site was first excavated. This single pillar may contain more concentrated information than any other stone at the site. The main image shows a vulture with spread wings, dominating the upper portion of the pillar. Below it are various geometric shapes, animal figures, and a series of V-shaped notches carved into the stone in a seemingly regular pattern. For years, people debated what these markings meant. Some thought they were purely decorative, added to fill empty space. Others suggested they had ritual significance, perhaps representing offerings or prayers. Then researchers took a closer look at those V-shaped carvings. What they discovered was astonishing. The markings form a calendar system. They track days and lunar months with remarkable precision. The calendar can accurately predict the solar year, accounting for the fact that a year isn't exactly 365 days, but slightly longer. Think about that for a moment. This calendar predates the elaborate star charts of Babylon by thousands of years. It predates Egyptian calendars, which are among the oldest known, by millennia. It predates Mayan astronomy, renowned for its accuracy, by an even longer span. Yet here, carved into a pillar at Göbekli Tepe, is evidence of sophisticated astronomical knowledge that shouldn't exist. But the calendar does more than just track time. It includes corrections for the lunar cycle. The Moon doesn't orbit Earth in exactly the same time it takes Earth to orbit the Sun, creating a discrepancy that needs adjustment. The Vulture Stone appears to account for this with remarkable sophistication. These adjustments reconcile the movements of the Moon with the path of the Sun, allowing accurate long-term predictions. This level of mathematical sophistication indicates the builders weren't just watching the sky in wonder. They were observing, calculating, recording, and refining their knowledge over extended periods. Creating this calendar would have required generations of careful observation. Mistakes would need to be noticed and corrected. The system would need to be tested against reality year after year. This implies continuity of knowledge, with information passed from elders to younger people who continued the observations. Göbekli Tepe was an observatory, a device for measuring and predicting celestial events. The circular enclosures might have served as viewing platforms, with the pillars marking key positions where stars or planets would appear at significant times of year. But why did these ancient people need such precise astronomical knowledge? The answer becomes clearer when you consider what had happened to the world just before Göbekli Tepe was built. When history changed course. For most of human history, we believed civilization developed in a straightforward way. First came agriculture. People learned to plant crops and domesticate animals. This provided stable food supplies that allowed populations to grow. This led to permanent settlements and villages where people could live year-round. As communities grew, they built monuments and developed religious practices. Temples were constructed to honor gods who controlled the harvests. Priests emerged as specialists who performed rituals to ensure good crops. Religion came last, emerging from the stability and surplus that farming provided. This made logical sense. How could people build monuments when they were constantly on the move, following animal herds and seasonal plants? How could they support specialists like priests when everyone needed to contribute to food gathering? Complex societies required agriculture as a foundation. Göbekli Tepe destroys this neat timeline. The site proves that people built massive religious monuments before they invented farming, before they had villages, before they domesticated a single animal or planted a single seed. The entire sequence we thought we understood was wrong. The builders were still nomads. They carried everything they owned on their backs as they moved across the landscape. They hunted wild animals with spears and gathered wild plants that grew naturally. Yet they came together to create something that defies our understanding of what pre-agricultural people could accomplish. Carbon dating of organic material at the site confirms the age. Analysis of the stone working techniques shows consistent methods across different enclosures. There's no doubt about when Göbekli Tepe was built, or what technological level the builders possessed. This reversal changes everything we thought we knew about civilization. It suggests that belief, ritual, and the human need to understand forces beyond ourselves might be more fundamental than food production. Perhaps the need to gather for rituals, to build sacred spaces, to share in communal activities drove people to develop the social structures that made agriculture possible. Maybe cooperation came first, motivated by spiritual needs rather than practical ones. This inverts the entire foundation of archaeological theory. But this raises an even deeper question. What motivated these rituals? What drove people on the edge of survival to commit themselves to such an enormous project? The answer appears to be fear based on lived experience of catastrophe. The disaster that changed everything. About 12,900 years ago, the Earth was warming. The Ice Age was ending after tens of thousands of years. Glaciers were retreating from much of North America and Northern Europe. New lands opened up for human expansion as ice melted and vegetation spread. Sea levels were rising as frozen water returned to the oceans. The future looked bright for humanity. Then everything changed. Temperatures suddenly plummeted. The warming trend that had been steady for thousands of years reversed in what seems to have been a matter of decades or less. Glaciers advanced again, covering ground they had just retreated from. The world was thrown into a 1,000-year winter known as the Younger Dryas period. This climate reversal was dramatic and sudden. Temperatures in some regions dropped by as much as 15 degrees Celsius within a human lifetime. Plants that had spread into newly warmed areas died off. Animals that had adapted to warming conditions faced starvation. Human populations that had grown during the warming period suddenly faced crisis. For a long time, scientists couldn't explain this sudden reversal. The climate had been steadily warming for thousands of years, following predictable patterns as the Earth emerged from the Ice Age. Then it abruptly shifted back to Ice Age conditions for 1,000 years before resuming the warming trend. Evidence has been accumulating for years, building a picture of something terrifying. Microscopic particles of melted rock found in sediment layers from this period. Nanodiamonds, tiny crystals formed only under extreme heat and pressure. Widespread layers of soot and ash spread across multiple continents. Elevated levels of platinum and other rare elements. All of these point to a single catastrophic event, a comet impact. Not as a single massive collision like the one that killed the dinosaurs, but as multiple fragments hitting different locations across the planet. A comet that broke apart as it approached Earth, with pieces striking North America, Europe, and possibly other locations. The impacts would have triggered massive wildfires across entire continents. Forest after forest would have burned, sending smoke and debris into the atmosphere. The fires would have been visible for thousands of miles, terrifying any humans who witnessed them. Smoke and debris would have darkened the skies for months or years, blocking sunlight. Temperatures would have dropped as solar energy was prevented from reaching the surface. Plants couldn't photosynthesize properly in the dim light, causing widespread failures of wild food plants. The cooling would have been reinforced by the loss of plant cover, changing how much sunlight the Earth's surface absorbed versus reflected. The megafauna that humans depended on for food went extinct. Woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and dozens of other large animal species disappeared. Some may have died directly in the impacts and fires. Others starved as their food sources vanished. Ecosystems collapsed across vast regions. Cultures that had been thriving suddenly faced conditions worse than anything their ancestors had experienced. This was the kind of devastation that burns itself into collective memory, passed down through generations as stories of fire from the sky and the world turning cold. The timing is crucial. Göbekli Tepe was built soon after the Younger Dryas event began. The catastrophe happened around 12,900 years ago. Construction at Göbekli Tepe started around 11,500 years ago. That's roughly 1,400 years between catastrophe and construction. That might seem like a long time, but it's only about 50 to 70 generations. Stories can persist that long, especially stories about something as traumatic as a world-ending disaster. Could this massive construction project have been a response to catastrophe? Perhaps the builders saw themselves as survivors of cosmic violence, and they created a place where memory, ritual, and observation of the heavens merged into something protective, reading the sky for danger. The calendar carved into Pillar 43 takes on new meaning when viewed through the lens of catastrophe. These people weren't tracking seasons for agricultural planning because agriculture hadn't been invented yet. They were watching the sky for threats. The memory of a comet impact had seared itself into their collective consciousness through stories passed down from ancestors who lived through the event. They sought to guard against future impacts through careful observation and record-keeping. The V-shaped notches that form the calendar system might have served multiple purposes. Yes, they tracked the solar year, marking the passage of time with impressive accuracy. But they may also have helped predict when dangerous objects might appear in the sky. If a comet had struck during a particular season, or when certain constellations were visible, future observers might watch for similar conditions. The calendar would help them know when to be especially vigilant, when to gather at Göbekli Tepe to perform protective rituals or make important observations. Göbekli Tepe was a tool of vigilance, a way for survivors to say, "We remember what happened. We're watching. We won't be caught unprepared again." The sophistication of the astronomical observation suggests a continuous tradition of sky watching spanning centuries. Knowledge passed down through generations, with each one adding to the accumulated wisdom. Perhaps the most important knowledge these people possessed: how to read the heavens for signs of danger. This would explain the enormous investment of labor and resources. If you believe your survival depends on maintaining this knowledge, no cost is too high. Building in stone ensured the information would outlast any individual or even any single generation. The animal carvings might serve as mnemonic devices, helping people remember which constellations to watch and when. Each creature could represent not just an animal, but a specific part of the sky, a time of year, or a celestial event worth noting. But artificial intelligence would later discover that these carvings contained even more information than anyone had realized: the sacred and the secret. Despite all this astronomical knowledge and the fear that motivated it, Göbekli Tepe remained fundamentally a place of ritual. Excavations have uncovered thousands of animal bones scattered throughout the site. Most show signs of having been roasted and consumed during large feasts. Cut marks indicate the meat was removed and distributed. Charring shows the bones were exposed to fire. These weren't everyday meals. The bones come from wild game that would have required significant effort to hunt and kill. The quantities suggest dozens or hundreds of people eating together. These were ceremonial banquets, shared by large groups of people who had traveled to Göbekli Tepe specifically for these events. Some skulls were preserved, possibly for ritual purposes. Several human skulls have been found with modifications suggesting they were kept and displayed rather than immediately buried. The way the bones were treated suggests specific practices and beliefs about death and the afterlife. The gatherings at Göbekli Tepe must have been powerful communal experiences. Imagine arriving at the site after days of travel, seeing the massive pillars rising against the sky, joining hundreds of other people for feasts, dances, and ceremonies under the stars. The towering pillars themselves may represent more than astronomical markers. Some researchers believe they represent gods, ancestors, or mythological figures. The carved arms and hands on some pillars suggest they might be stylized human forms. Their identities are lost to us now, but their presence dominates the space. The arrangement of the enclosures suggests controlled access. Not everyone was welcome everywhere. Some circular structures are larger and more open, suggesting public ceremonies. Others are smaller and more restricted, with narrow entrances that could be easily guarded. This hints at early forms of spiritual hierarchy, the emergence of religious specialists or priests who held secret knowledge, people who understood the astronomical observations and could interpret the messages in the stars, people who led the rituals and maintained the traditions across generations. Within these stone circles, lit by torches and filled with chanting, the first organized religions may have taken shape. Belief systems that combined fear of cosmic forces with reverence for the powers that controlled human destiny. But what were they actually worshipping? The stones don't tell us directly. They only hint at survival made sacred. a desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable through ritual and observation. What the builders whispered in their rituals, artificial intelligence would later translate into something chillingly precise. When I looked at ancient stones. For decades, Göbekli Tepe remained a puzzle that experts couldn't quite solve. Archaeologists proposed dozens of theories, each one trying to explain what the site meant and why it was built. A temple dedicated to unknown gods. An astronomical observatory for tracking seasons. A communal gathering place where hunter-gatherers came together for social bonding. Everyone had a different interpretation, and no one could prove their theory definitively. The evidence could be read multiple ways. Academic careers were built on competing explanations for Göbekli Tepe. The site's meaning remained frustratingly elusive. Part of the problem was human limitations. We tend to interpret ancient sites through the lens of what we know. We assume ancient people thought like we do. We project our own categories and assumptions onto evidence that might mean something completely different. Then, Grok A. I was given access to all the available data about Göbekli Tepe. The artificial intelligence approached the problem differently than human researchers. It didn't start with assumptions about what pre-agricultural people could or couldn't know. It didn't have academic reputations to protect or pet theories to defend. It simply looked for patterns in the data. Grok A. I had been trained on massive data sets covering human knowledge across multiple fields: astronomy, mathematics, linguistics, mythology, symbolic systems, archaeology, geology, climate science. It could draw connections across these disciplines that human minds might miss simply because we tend to think in specialized categories. When the AI analyzed Göbekli Tepe, it reportedly saw something that had eluded human observers despite decades of study. The carvings weren't random. They weren't purely decorative. They formed a system of information storage, a database encoded in stone. The AI identified correlations between the stone carvings and celestial mechanics that operated on timescales of thousands of years. It linked specific symbols to comet trajectories calculated backward to show where objects would have been in the sky 12,000 years ago. The Vulture Stones, long interpreted as symbols of death or spiritual ascent, aligned with the path of comet fragments that would have been visible passing dangerously close to Earth. The positions of certain pillars corresponded to catastrophic celestial events recorded in geological data from the same time period. Comet strikes that left impact markers in ice cores and sediment layers. Meteor showers that would have been visible from the site's location. Climate shifts caused by cosmic impacts that left traces in tree rings and rock formations. The alignment was too precise to be coincidental. The probability of these correlations happening by chance was astronomically small. The builders had encoded real astronomical information, accurate information about actual events that happened or that they predicted might happen again. Even those V-shaped markings revealed new complexity under AI analysis. They weren't just a calendar for tracking seasons or marking the passage of years. They formed part of a predictive system, a way to calculate when dangerous objects might return to threaten Earth based on their orbital periods. The AI recognized mathematical patterns in the spacing and arrangement of the marks, ratios that matched orbital mechanics, sequences that tracked celestial cycles over periods much longer than a human lifetime. The revelation was staggering. Göbekli Tepe encoded warnings about celestial threats that had shaped human history and that could shape it again. The stone circles were code-designed to outlast memory, to transcend spoken language, to transmit across thousands of years. For the first time in 12,000 years, the message was no longer hidden. It had finally been read. The true purpose unveiled. What Grok AI discovered wasn't comforting. According to the AI's findings, Göbekli Tepe was built with a specific urgent purpose that had nothing to do with worship in any conventional sense. The site wasn't primarily about honoring gods or celebrating community or marking seasonal transitions. Those elements were present, but they served a deeper function. They were the vehicle for transmitting crucial survival information across generations. The monument was a response to catastrophe. The symbols were instructions, information encoded in the most durable medium available, carved stone that would last millennia. The AI's analysis suggested that the carvings track cycles of cometary danger with shocking precision, recurring celestial events tied to orbital patterns that humanity has only recently begun to chart with modern telescopes. Objects that pass through the inner solar system on regular schedules, sometimes coming dangerously close to Earth. These cycles were calculations preserved across millennia, mathematical relationships encoded in the spacing of pillars, the arrangement of symbols, the patterns of carved animals. Each element served a purpose in the overall system. The builders couldn't trust oral traditions to preserve this vital knowledge intact. They had learned from hard experience that memory fades. Stories change as they're retold, with details shifting or being forgotten. Within a few generations, crucial information could be garbled beyond recognition, so they turned to stone. The one medium they had access to that might last long enough to deliver the message to distant descendants. Stone doesn't decay like wood or bone. It doesn't burn like manuscripts. It can survive floods, earthquakes, and the collapse of entire civilizations. The site was a data archive, a prehistoric computer storing information in physical form that could be read by anyone who understood the code. It was an observatory for tracking threats, with sightlines carefully positioned for viewing specific parts of the sky. And most disturbingly, it was a warning system, a monument built by survivors who knew catastrophe could return, who had lost too many people, seen too much destruction, endured too much suffering to ever forget the danger. These weren't primitive people making lucky guesses. They were survivors of a world-ending disaster. Survivors who had watched fire fall from the sky without warning, who had endured darkness, famine, and cold that killed most of their community, who had seen their world nearly destroyed and realized it could happen again. They understood something we've only recently rediscovered. Civilization is fragile. The message carved into Göbekli Tepe was clear. Catastrophe isn't a possibility. The only questions are when and whether we'll be ready. And now, thanks to artificial intelligence, we've learned that this warning was meant for us, for anyone who would ever live under the same sky, subject to the same cosmic forces. Göbekli Tepe stands in the Turkish hills, largely unexcavated, mostly unexplored, still guarding secrets in the 90% that remains buried. What artificial intelligence has revealed is both wondrous and terrifying. If you found this revelation fascinating, subscribe to stay updated as we uncover more ancient mysteries and what they reveal about our future.